Gary Neville this morning on Twitter says, I remember a time when United players, managers, executives wouldn't be seen in their local Italian after a draw at home, let alone getting knocked out of Europe. This last week, we've seen a global tour of F1, concerts, cricket and UFC events. This lot, says Gary, are tone deaf. Gary Lineker came back at that and said, true, but they were mostly getting hammered down the pub without everyone being on social media to spy on them. In other words, Lineker's saying, different time, of course. From what you said.
Yeah, it's just a narrative being spun by going over to get the fans on board. It's nonsense, really, because he's not giving it context. Lineker's spot on. There was plenty more. There was worse going on back then. He just didn't have the same highlight and magnifying glass on it.
What, on Man United's players who are winning league after league after league?
Well, I think you'll find if you take Liverpool as the best example.
He was talking about Man United.
No, I know, but the same principle would apply for Man United. I wasn't at Man United.
Liverpool were winning Premier Leagues. Man United were.
When Liverpool winning league titles constantly through the 80s,
different time in football.
Yeah, but if you let somebody speak, you'll get to the point. The same philosophy,
we can but hope.
The same philosophy went from the 80s to the 90s, where United were winning it, and the early 2000s when United were winning it, they were still out celebrating, doing the night, going for meals, having a bevy. They were. Some of those lads I know well, and they weren't on social media being pictured everywhere. Now, they might not have been flying off to F1 meets, or they might not have been in Dubai, but they were still out socialising, doing things. I mean, I could give you some examples now that aren't particularly great, but there was plenty of times I saw United lads out doing things.
So are you saying Rashford and, Brandon Williams is on loan at Norwich, but Rashford shouldn't have been there, Simon?
No, I mean, listen,
they should have been lying low.
I understand what Gary's doing is virtue signalling to the Manchester backdrop. Maybe it's because he wants to get himself a little elected. There's the mayor of Manchester. Who knows what Gary's on about in his latest incarnation? But a lot of the things he said recently, I've agreed with. I've agreed with the idea that he said the other day, talking about Marcus Rashford, specifically Marcus Rashford, about leaving Man United will be a failure for Marcus Rashford. It'll be a failure for the coaching staff, and ultimately Marcus Rashford will not be able to stand alone and be able to influence as he once did without the Man United badge behind him. I agreed with that. Yeah. I also agree with the fact that there is a time and a place to understand how the world looks, and he's saying he's harking back to a time that there was a successful United side, and I don't disagree with Gary that Danny, that the players behaved in a certain way. But if they were winning, and I have to be careful here because I'm the first person to say winning something, an individual game, doesn't justify a set of behaviour. You either mean something or you don't, and having a good game or being a decent player in a game doesn't mean that you can then go out on the Waz the next night as an excuse and get away with it because you played a good game. But United have got a cultural problem. And the look, whether we like it or we don't like it, whether Danny wants to advance a case what happened in the 80s and 90s and 70s as an example to what happens in this day and age is irrelevant. Those players weren't getting paid what they're getting paid now. There wasn't the focus and the dynamic of how football is held together back in those days as there is now. And if there was then, those players wouldn't get away with it then. Gary Lineker's argument is claptrap. What's that got to do with anything? Rights and wrongs. The bottom line is United are in a really difficult position right now as a football club.
True.
Their players shouldn't be scattered around the globe. They should be looking as if, even if it's just a look, that they should be looking as if they are focused on the United problem.
By doing what?
Simply keeping themselves out of the way.
Or staying at home.
Well, whatever it takes. I think there's an element of...
Yeah, but Simon, listen, Rashford's an adult. Rashford was out there. He went... Hang on.
Let's say Rashford stays at home.
He went to the boxing.
Yes.
He went to the boxing. It was in his best behaviour. Not that he's never not. And I would presume he's out in Dubai for a few days. He'd be putting himself through a few training sessions himself.
If Rashford, and this is the point, if Rashford is at home in Manchester, somewhere in Manchester, and then he goes out for a meal to the pub with his mates, if he goes to a restaurant, he's out socialising, doing the wrong thing. He should be training every day. He's probably training every day in Dubai.
Exactly.
We don't know that. So times have changed. I think you're right on what you're saying, Simon, in that if you're winning games, generally what you're doing doesn't matter. People forgive it.
Sure.
And that's what I was saying about the 80s, 90s and 2000s.
There's also,
when you're winning, you can do what you want.
There's also a flip side to the argument. And again, this might be just a little bit of the British mentality of the old green eye. There's something about seeing a player that ain't doing it, isn't across it, being dropped from a squad, glad-handing it, whilst dispensing advice to a boxer that he doesn't apply to himself.
He's only supporting Sonny Edwards.
But I know you were being your sycophantic best there, and you were getting from him
shut up.
that sort of response.
He's only supporting Sonny Edwards.
I know, but we're in a world where these players are afforded such enormous opportunity, such enormous respect and regard, and the bottom line is if you're not doing it, there's kind of a part of people that go, in the background, please. And I understand that. And Gary Neville...
So there's no issue if he's banging them in and United are winning?
There's less of an issue in the terms of if he was banging them in, he wouldn't be there, would he? He'd be in the England squad. So that Darnett would have been pulled away because he'd be being rewarded for his performances. Right now, he stinks the place out. He's a shadow of himself, but he's big enough and ugly enough to be in Dubai watching the boxing, dispensing advice to a fighter that is achieving something.
Do you know what we're talking? We're talking generically
it.
instead. If we're talking about Rashford, there is an argument here. Say, read the room.
That's my point. That's the terminology I was looking for.
Things aren't going well for you. Keep your head down. Keep your nut down. Get on. Be seen to be doing the right thing. You know by now how social media works.
Yeah.
You know how the fans are at the moment. So stay out of trouble and stay out of the way.
Right.
Last thing you want to be doing is a boxing match. I'm with that.
Well, he did well.
But if we're talking...
Isn't that Gary's trouble?
Isn't that Gary's central point?
He's picky, yeah, maybe, but we'll keep it to Rashford. I think if you're talking about Man U as a whole, there's different strokes for different folks. I mean, Manchester United players are often international. If there's 5 lads training and one of them is from France and he's not in the France squad, well, why shouldn't he go home for a few days and go out for a night out if he's trained hard for, what? There's a balance.
I mean,
it shouldn't come under a Manchester United badge.
He will train out in Dubai. I'm quite sure if he's out there for a few days. I don't know.
No,
how long
but it's
he's out there
for Rashford individually.
I didn't have the time to be more sycophantic with him, or I would have. But
yeah, I'm sure you would.
But the bottom line is, I'm hardly going to stand there and say, "Well, Sonny, good to speak to you and well done."
No.
So, Marcus, what the hell are you doing here?
No. Let's not turn it into that sort of conversation. Let's turn it into the conversation about Gary Neville making a point and Gary Lineker a juxtapose on that position. I'm in the camp that I want successful players to be human beings and be able to prosper and live a reasonable life, but I also want them to remember the bloody opportunity that they've got. And I think they've forgotten where they've come from or where they're actually at. I think they should pinch themselves every day of the week and remind themselves that they can't believe all their Christmases have come at once. So keep away from anything that doesn't read the room right. You cannot suggest to me that a player that is really struggling would be better served out and about at glamorous events in the eyes and minds of those that effectively put him where he is. Whether that's the eyes on a prize for broadcasters or the eyes on a prize for a stadium. It is football fans, to some extent, that have driven the notion that football players should be at a level of £25 million a year or £10 million
So are you
a year.
saying that United, maybe Simon, before he went, Marcus, incidentally,
Yeah,
am I hearing that you're going out to Dubai to go to
I would.
the
This is the same player that
maybe
came
not
back.
go.
This is a player that shouldn't have been allowed to go to the European Championships. When he came back from the European Championships, shouldn't have been allowed to go on holiday and then come back for an injury, an operation because he wanted to go on holiday first. The whole landscape of Man United is wrong. And that's the reasons why you've got what you've got.
Well, could you argue that what we're talking about now in football is a very different place to a manager walking through the door of a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon and saying, "Look, lads, none of you are going away. I'm taking your passport. You're not going away. You do the right thing. You're staying here." Because you'll get certain players now that doesn't. Which manager is capable of doing that now? Maybe Klopp or Guardiola, maybe. But even Guardiola's not going after players when they're out on the lash.
But I do think that there are managers that are capable of doing it. I don't think it's the easiest of tasks, but he's the ones that are capable of doing it. Ones that are winning things. Yeah. And why they're winning things? Because they're capable of doing that.
So
sort
here's
of
the thing. What do we say to the unconfirmed, I stress, unconfirmed reports that Ralph Rangnick is out in Barbados watching the cricket?
Same thing.
Well, that's worse.
Same thing. There you are. Then you can't criticise the lunatics for wanting to run the asylum, can you?
You can't. That's a very different thing, Jim. So what you're talking about is the leader. You're talking about the captain of the ship. You've got to be. You're representing a football club on a bigger scale than any player. Mm. So he's got to be there. Okay. Now, if I was a manager,
why would Ralph Rangnick be watching cricket?
Well,
the Germans are renowned for cricket.
Furthermore, and I'll tell you, the best managers I've ever worked with, when you've got international breaks and the lads who aren't particularly first teamers or they're trying hard to progress and get to that level,
working with them.
They're there.
Yeah.
That's because what does it say to those lads who are stuck at training? Your managers on a different.
Remember,
country?
I met you at Craven Cottage all these years ago.
Oh, I'm not bringing that up.
And Fulham had beaten Manchester United.
Again, yeah.
And I said, "How are you doing, Danny? You got a moment?" What was your in all seriousness, what was your reply?
No, sorry, I'm off to Dubai.
He's a ghastly little creature, isn't he? He's a ghastly little creature, isn't he?
Oh, Danny. Listen. Anyway, Marcus Rashford, in spite of what you might have heard from the man on my right, it was still good to see you, but it was particularly good to see Sonny Edwards.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.